Hey, seniors. This week we're going to be continuing talking about Indigenous people and the land, thinking about what relationship do Indigenous people have with the land, and how are colonizers still impacting the land and stealing it from its rightful protectors. For your own benefit, I would love you to take notes because it helps us learn better, it helps us understand, and it's a really good skill to have. But since you're watching the Ed puzzle, you don't have to submit the notes because you have to ask or you have to answer the questions in this Ed puzzle, and that's like your notes. So that's up to you. I'd love to see your notes if you take them with this Ed puzzle, but you are not required. So first things first, how are you today? How are you feeling? How's school going? Is there anything you want to share about your life? Any of that? Okay, so as always, we need to acknowledge the land we're on. This land traditionally belongs to the Ohlone people. The session number 281 is the part of a treaty that gave over this land to the government. Once again, a land acknowledgement, it's a powerful way of showing respect, and it's a step forward in correcting the stories and practices that erase Indigenous people and their history. And it invites us, or it allows us to invite Indigenous people in, and it also honors the truth. A reminder of what it means to be Indigenous. This is the idea that humans or this culture came from one original place and did not migrate or move. Oh my God. Here's our vocabulary words. They're the same every week. These are hard words. The reason that we're using these is because these are the practices that we are doing in this class. We are engaging in these three things. So since we're doing them, you should be able to define them. Indigenization, this is when we bring in two ways of knowing or ways of teaching. So I'm trying to combine Indigenous teaching with my Western teaching in order to bring together these two cultures so we can have a deeper understanding of things. Decolonization. So this is when we break free of colonial beliefs and ideas. Decolonization can happen in the inside world and the outside world, the physical world and in my mind, right? Breaking free of colonialism in the physical world can look like giving land back, rebuilding land, rebuilding Indigenous sites, reversing gentrification, right? Rebuilding neighborhoods with people of color. Those are all ways to decolonize in the physical world. But I can also decolonize my mind, right? And that's what this class is doing, is we're unlearning what we've been taught about Indigenous cultures and all these topics we're talking about, and we're relearning truth. Lastly, reconciliation. This is about addressing past wrongs done to Indigenous people and making amends, right? So this class, we speak a lot of truth in order to start towards reconciling what education has done to Indigenous people. All right, so the land. In Indigenous teachings, the relationship between humans and the land has always been discussed. So if we look back 15,000 years or more to the stories that were told by Indigenous people, always there was an element of land present. because it's both a living being and it's a teacher. So stories are traditionally meant to teach people or inform, right? So they use land to inform people, to teach people those things. Indigenous people also live lightly, so they can minimize environmental impact and ensure this earth is okay for future generations. Indigenous people have been protecting the land and taking care of it for their future children for thousands and thousands of years, right? We talked about controlled burning. We know that Indigenous people, one of their main food sources was hunting bison or buffalo. And when they would hunt them, they wouldn't just like see all of them that they could catch. They would only take down one, right, for their entire tribe. So they weren't greedy with the land, right? They didn't chop down a bunch of trees. They didn't kill a bunch of animals. They didn't pollute. They really made it the most important thing to take care of the land. And that has continued in their culture up to today, right? Last week we watched the Dakota Access Pipeline protesters at Standing Rock, right? Those were Indigenous people leading the way in protecting the land from more environmental harm. Currently, right now, I think it's in New Mexico on the border. There's Indigenous people who are protesting to stop the building of the border wall between the U.S. and Mexico. All over the world, in Brazil, Indigenous people protest against deforestation, all of those things. So they have continued to fight for land to ensure that future generations can live on the beautiful earth. So this slide has to do with indigenization. So why am I talking about land and why is it important? So from the indigenous perspective, this is understanding the land as a living being. This gives us insight into and increases our awareness of how we treat and interact with the land. So if I bring in the indigenous teaching that land is living, right, and it's our teacher, that allows us as a class to change how we treat the land. And then the classroom perspective, using the land as a teacher allows us to breathe life into the maps that we look at, as well as imagine the land that we live on in new and creative ways, right? So if I can get us to understand that land is a living being and it's a teacher, then it opens up our materials that we use in this class to become more interesting, right? If I look at a map and I see it as just tells me where things are, that's not super exciting. But if I know that this map is a portrait of a living being and it has meaning and value and importance to people, then I might be more excited about looking at something like a map. So the way we know Indigenous people connect to the land so much is through storytelling. So we're going to think about how does storytelling help us connect to the land? We need to understand that there's power in words. Audio recordings are important for Indigenous people because they pass down forms of knowledge and they allow others to experience spiritual, social, and political forms of growth. So, oral stories or recordings of stories allows Indigenous people to connect with their ancestors and their culture, but it also allows us non-Native people to see the land or their experiences from their own perspective. Historically, Indigenous languages are not written languages, right? They don't have letters. If anything was written, it was in pictographs or hieroglyphics, right? So pictures instead of words like the Egyptians used. So the way that they passed down their history and their stories was through oral storytelling, right? That's what I'm doing right now is I'm orating this lesson to you. They only pass down their history through oral retellings, which is why recording these stories now is super important, right? Because as we lose connections with ancestors or with language, we want to have these things recorded so we can cherish them. We're able to see the land through each other's eyes and connect with others' experiences, right? That's why it's important to tell these stories. We're going to listen to 3 short podcasts from Indigenous people talking about how they connect with land and what they were feeling or thinking in those moments that they connected, or what motivated them to connect with land. And we want to think about, so what happens when we become disconnected? How can we reconnect? Okay, so in your notes, if you're taking notes, you're going to answer these 3 questions. After I play the clip, I'm going to stop it and you are going to type your responses. My tip, my helpful hint would be to take notes while you're listening so it's easier to answer these questions after. We're thinking about, so what does the storyteller do to connect with the land? And then 2 and 3 are your own inferences, your own thoughts, or guesses. So why, after listening, why do you think that story might be important to them or to their culture? And then why do you think that story should be shared, or that type of story?
Tell you about Indian and Cowboy? Some stories from the land with your host, Hayden King. There's a lot that resonated with me in the short story that Jonathan Thomas tells. He begins by listing the people in his life that have left, or people that simply were never there. And there's a gap, there's a hole that accompanies their absence, and it quickly becomes apparent. I grew up in similar circumstances, and I know that many of us did. But in this simple story, Jonathan's able to seek out and find those missing pieces elsewhere. And that's perseverance, resilience. This is Jonathan Thomas and the gift of hunting.
My name is Jonathan Thomas. I was born in Prince George. Originally, I'm from the south side. My band office is called Nitaiban. For the first part of my life, I lived on the south side in a trailer right beside the band office. And I only grew up with my mom out of the 5 kids my mom had in the middle. I'm the middle child. I have 2 older brothers. I have 1 younger brother, and I have a younger sister. Out of all the kids, I was and still am the only one without my dad in my life. So I didn't grow up with a father figure. So I never really got into sports, and growing up with both my grandparents passed away before I was even 5 years old. So I didn't even learn how to speak my language or learn how to hunt. But my uncle brought me out hunting like 3 times in my life. He would always do all the work. He would shoot the moose, he would skin it and gut it, and cut it up. Once I got old enough and tough enough, I helped out pack the moose meat back to the truck. My mom is the oldest. She had 2 younger brothers. One passed away around the same time my grandparents did. So I've missed out on a lot not having certain people in my life. The reason why hunting is so important to me is I like hunting and it's a lot of work, but I like it to be able to provide for family. I want to be able to teach my brothers and my little sister. I want to be able to learn about this to teach people about hunting. Hunting is kind of like a chance to be a father or a provider. That makes me feel proud, strong, and independent. And thank you. My name is Jonathan Thomas. I'm from Burns Lake, BC.
Okay. So now write your responses. After you write them, I will share what I was thinking. Okay. So this person, Jonathan, he connects to the land through moose hunting. And why is this story important to them or their culture? So this story told us how he reconnected with part of his culture and his identity through hunting through the land, right? He had a lot of people who died early on in his life or were just absent, which caused him to miss a lot of cultural knowledge and experiences that other Indigenous people with full families might have experienced. So he sees the moose hunt as a way that he grew into his culture, as well as an opportunity for him to teach other people and become a fatherly figure to other people and a provider that he was missing in his life. I think you can have lots of answers for this question. I think it's important to share this story because people can connect with loss and they can connect with not having one or both of your parents. So it allows us to connect as humans and realize that we share a lot of similar experiences. And it also tells me that people can find meaning and fill holes in their life through the land, right? Connecting with nature. Okay, next one.
Maya Karan is a Métis woman who tells the story of her family's home and the land in southern Saskatchewan, how the land informs her identity, her family's path through history, how the land has a significant bearing on the Métis Nation itself. Maya's story is broad and sweeping and romantic, even though it tells of loss. This is Maya Karan and the story of her family.
My people, the Métis, go back hundreds of years. They were of French-Canadian and Plains Cree ancestry, hunters who followed the buffalo herds across the prairie. After the Red River Resistance in 1870, my family was driven off their farms in Red River by white settlers and were among the first to settle Batoche. I went to Batoche for the first time last summer and looked over the great Saskatchewan River. I imagined my relations seeing it after traveling hundreds of miles from Red River. Each family claimed its own river lot and began to build log homes and plow the rich soil. My great-great-uncle, Michel Dumas, was with Gabriel Dumont when the Métis went to get Louis Riel to help them petition for title to those river lots. But their fight would end in bloodshed, for Prime Minister MacDonald wanted that rich land for European farmers. In 1885, during the Northwest Resistance, Louis Riel and my ancestors fought the troops that MacDonald sent to put them down. My great-great-grandparents' house was burned to the ground during the Battle of Batoche. They rebuilt it in 1890, but it would be another 15 years before they got title to that land. My family had sold that house and land to the government in the 1970s. Land that had been in my family for 100 years finally belonged to the settler colonial government. The house is now as an exhibit at the Batoche National Historic Site. When I was in Batoche, I walked out to my great-great-grandparents' back fields, where a plaque marks the spot where General Middleton camped with his troops. The government of Canada might own it now, but in my heart, that land is still my family's. The government can't take away my connection to the fierce love my family had to this place. Those Batoche fields and sloping cut banks to the Saskatchewan are in my DNA.
Okay, so that story was a little different. I'm going to share my thinking before you type your answers, just to switch it up. So this person connects with the land through stories that were passed down, but then further connects with the land when she goes to visit the actual places that her family and her ancestors fought for from the European settlers. In Canada, it was mostly French, not mostly. The French colonized Canada, and they used it a lot for trapping in the fur trade. Yes. No, what was it? Oh, why is a story important to them or their culture? Like she said at the end, right? This land is in her DNA. The stuff that happened at on the land there, right? Carried through generations, right? Having a family fight for their land in war impacts families for generations to come, right? She's like, this is in my DNA. This is my story. This is where I come from. And then, and so what's different about her is she already had a connection with her family's history, but was disconnected from the land they came from because of settlers coming in and stealing the land, right? So she's reconnecting with the land for her ancestors, right? It's like coming full circle. Again, number 2 and number 3, you can have lots of answers and ways of thinking. I would write that this is an important story to tell because it tells us a personal story about Indigenous genocide and stealing their land, right? When I read about how Indigenous people fought for their land, it's usually just in a history book or told not from the Indigenous perspective, but this woman's grandparents fought for their land, right? So it's a really personal connection with this loss, and it's important for non-Indigenous people to hear that. Also, it shows us how the government of Canada and the US would beat down or wear down Indigenous people until they finally were just like so exhausted and had fought in wars and battles and were just like, you know what, I'm going to sell you this land. It's not worth it anymore, which is sad and that's heartbreaking. Okay, so now write your 3 answers before we go to the last one.
How to play guitar, and I need to get a guitar. I have 2 pairs of socks, a t-shirt, a long sleeve t-shirt, and a hoodie.
It's deeply personal. Not so. The tale that Ryan McMahon tells for Stories from the Land is deeply personal. Not so different from much of his comedy. This is an honest story about his very identity. But it's also a story about the confusion, a sense of belonging, and even resentment that so many Cree and Métis Ojibwe youth deal with growing up, especially mixed race youth. This is also a story about moose hunting with very few moose. It's a story about how hunting can sometimes help organize our lives. Not in terms of seasons, goose season, deer season, etc., but how our social lives are organized. The mentorship of our fathers, the perverse rules of settler game wardens, the peer pressure of cousins and friends, the very construction of race. This story is raw, but also incredibly detailed. It captures the essence of a period in Ryan's life that has shaped his very worldview into the present. This is Ryan McMahon and moose hunting.
The alarm clock blares loudly through my room and spills out into the house. It's 3:30 a.m. Cold. I force an eye open. It's cold in the house. The old wood floor meets my feet. I slip on my moccasins. The sewing thread where my beadwork lies catches on my toenail. When was the last time I cut my toenails? Immediately I feel or smell the burn of cigarette smoke in my chest or nostrils. I smell coffee and the dust burning off the furnace. I open the bedroom curtain and reveal a fresh layer of fall snow. It's going to be cold out there. I put on long johns, 2 pairs of socks, a t-shirt, a long-sleeve t-shirt, and a hoodie. I pause. I take off the hoodie, I take off the long-sleeve t-shirt, I take off the t-shirt, then I put on the long-sleeve t-shirt, I put on the t-shirt, I put on the hoodie. I'm going moose hunting, but I still need to look like Kurt Cobain. He wears a t-shirt over a long-sleeve t-shirt, and I want to be Kurt Cobain. Which reminds me, I need to learn how to play guitar, and I need to get a guitar. Living in small town northwestern Ontario, there are no music shops, so I'll just dress like him until someone opens up a music shop. At the kitchen table, my dad looks at his feet and smokes. I'm not sure what he's looking at, but he looks at it for a long time. I eat my cornflakes, and he tells me to eat quieter so I don't wake up my mom or any of the other kids. On the counter sits our lunch. Dad has made 8 or 10 sandwiches. He's packed some cookies, and he's put some apples in a bag. We'll pick up chips and beef jerky from the gas bar on the way out of town. 2 thermoses of coffee are filled, though one doesn't have a lid. Dad blames Mom for losing the lid, but the truth is he stole the thermos from the mill, and it never had a lid then. There was a lot of that in my house growing up. Parts of things. We tie our hunting boots. My boots are clean. A little mud, but only as much mud as you'd get on them walking through puddles on a rainy day. Every time I hunt, I try to get them a little dirtier. I try to walk in the mud on purpose. I want my boots to look like my dad's boots. My dad's boots were covered in old moose blood. Miles and miles of Canadian Shield have traveled with these boots. He's a master hunter, a good provider, better than I'll ever be, I tell myself. I find myself staring at him a lot. I like that he's taken me to the bush. I like the way his knife is attached to his belt. His gun clips are in a pouch tied to his backpack. Everything is just so. Everything is planned, packed, and calculated because that's how good bushmen were. They knew you can die out there, and they don't want to die. They want to kill, but they don't want to die. His gun and my gun sit between us on the truck seat. I hold them so they don't bounce around as we drive. Something is on the radio. Dad smokes. I look out the window to see if anyone else from town is going to the bush. I don't see any lights on in any of the houses we pass. No movement, no other trucks on the road. Just us, I guess. And my uncle, and my cousins, because they're going hunting too. We make our way through town and drive up to the res. We're going to meet at the gas bar on my mom's res, Couchiching. Technically, it's my res too, but everyone tells me it's not because I'm from town and not a real Indian. I think they tell that to my mom too, because I've seen a look in her eyes before that tells me they've said that to her. She used to fight. I think that's why she used to fight. She's tough, I've heard. I don't really fight. It's too confusing to fight. I don't know what I'd be fighting about. They tell me that often. You're not an Indian. And frankly, that's okay by me. I fucking hated Dances with Wolves, and I wasn't a fan of TV on North of 60, and that's what Indians were to me at the time. The trucks sit side by side. The men sip hot McDonald's coffee and talk about which roads we're going to walk in on in the morning. They joke and tease and laugh, and that's my favorite part of the trip. It made me feel like one of them. The jokes. I could joke really good too. I could burn anyone with my tongue. The jokes turn to me, and my cousin tells me I'm shooting his moose for him this morning because he doesn't have a moose tag. That meant he'd shoot it, and when the MNR pulled us over, I'd say I shot it. I was an Indian, so the government couldn't say anything. I think I've shot 300 moose in my life, using only 5 bullets of my own. We've been stopped a few times. It's always the same questions, same cowboy cops, same results. Taking my status card out of my bloodied hunting pants felt like the ultimate fuck you to these guys. I don't know what felt better, standing up to the white man or helping my family out in this way. It feels good to say fuck you to the government. I don't know why, but it does. And I say it a lot. I say it because they've taken so much away from us. I heard a chief talk like that once, that's why I say it like that. I wish I could remember the other things the chief said that time I heard him speak. If I could remember the things he said that time I heard him speak, I'd be damn sure to tell the Ministry of Natural Resources guy those things. I'd let him know where my fuck you was coming from. It'd be good to know where that fuck you was coming from. Instead, I sit there and I shake like a leaf. I'm nervous. Sometimes standing up for yourself gets that way. It makes you shake. Every time we're pulled over by the MNR, I get this way. We've done nothing wrong. I ask my dad if he's sure they can't arrest me or anything later. He says he doesn't think so. And that doesn't help. Thanks to Ryan McMahon for his story.
Okay. So that one, write your answers and then I'll share. Okay, so obviously this storyteller connected to the land through moose hunting, but what I also thought was interesting is how he connected to the land through storytelling and the way he used descriptive language, right? I was able to be in his room with him and in the truck and imagine what he was going through and what he was wearing because of the way he described his environment and his surrounding. And I think I can make an argument for that being a connection to the land. Again, number 2 and 3, you can have lots of different answers. My thinking is the story is important because it shows how this teen connected with his indigenous culture. So he was mixed, he was half white, half native. And his idea of what it meant to be a native was tainted by the media, right? All those stereotypes and images we looked at a couple weeks ago is how he saw native people and was like, well, I don't want to be part of that anyways. But this allowed him to practice his indigenous culture as well as see his dad be a powerful, successful indigenous person through hunting, right? It also shows us how indigenous people, when they grow up, have to learn about the U.S. government and the ways that it has killed your people and also continues to hurt them. He talked about the hunting tags. So if you don't know about hunting, if you go hunting, you have to apply to hunt and they give you permission to shoot the animal. And they tell you how many. So let's say it's deer hunting season. You apply and then they're like, we only have 2,000 deer tags to give out. So then they like randomly give them out to people that applied. if you got a tag, you can go hunt. If you didn't get a tag, you cannot hunt. And if you're caught hunting, it's very expensive fines, and sometimes you can go to jail. Even if, so like, let's say it's duck season and you're like, okay, you got a tag to hunt, you can get 20 ducks, and you get pulled over by they're like Parks and Rec game police, and you have like 22 ducks and you were only supposed to get 20, then you get in big trouble for that too. But if you are a Native person, something that they have won for themselves, that they fought for, is the right to hunt on whatever they want. And that's okay, because we know they're respectful hunters and they're not going to go out and hunt, like over hunt. So in this case, his cousin didn't get a moose tag, so he couldn't hunt the moose. But if he did get a moose, he would just say it was his cousin's, right? Because he was the native person. So he had the right to do this. And that allowed this storyteller to be like, fuck you, government. I'm going to hunt on my land because it's my right. So those are reasons I think that this story might be important to them or their culture. I think it's important to share so people can connect modern day Native people with the images of the past, right? We have this idea of the Native person on a horse with the headdress, painted up, all of that. But that's very much not what Indigenous people in America look like today. So this story tells us about, like, this kid is just a teenager. He wants to look like the singer Kurt Cobain and look all cool, even though he is an Indigenous person. So it tells us a modern story. And it also tells us about different laws and the struggle of being mixed race. So those are my thoughts. We're going to skip this. This is just a map of Canada and the US, of different Native tribes all around. In this area, you can see there's a lot of different tribal names, yet in this area, in these areas, there's not. I think this is because the people in these areas were so spread out, and it's not very well documented what each individual tribe referred to themselves as. So if we, like, this says Lakota really big, because Lakota territory was like all over here, but it also really small has the Sioux tribes, right? And Sioux is just a general name for the Native people in this area, just like Ohlone is the general name for the people in this area, right? But we know that there was lots of different tribal names, and this land should probably look more like this. Just to show you how many different names. I think this is where one of the storytellers was from. Nitsitapi was his. In Canada, they call them bands and not tribes. Is a band of Native people. That's where that comes from. This is where I'm from, Sioux people. Some people who told their story were Anishinaabe, which is this area. Okay, again, our weekly reminder of things we need to eliminate from our vocab. I'm going to draw attention to savage. Generally, I would say 99% of the time, it's okay to use this word. Like, we love that Meg Thee Stallion song. But just being aware of, if you're around a Native American, that the word savage was used to really harm their people. So we just don't want to use the word savage when we're referring to a group of people or a culture. It kind of aligns with red skin. It's less violent than red skin for sure. But so you can use this word. You can be like, yo, that's savage. That's fine. But just be aware of who you're talking to. We don't want to call people chief. You can call people bro. Avoid using the word Indian unless you're referring to people from India. All those things. Okay, your assignments. Okay, so attendance check-in, get this done by 5. You're right here right now. Lecture notes. This is, so if you do an ed puzzle, you do not have to submit notes. If you did notes, please show me them just because I want to see them. I want to see your hard work. But if you completed all the questions in the ed puzzle, you can just click turn in, and I'll remember, hopefully. The Pear Deck. Excuse me. I feel pretty good today. Okay. Oh, I don't want to start there. Okay, stress check. I want you to explain why you put yourself, what scale you put yourself on. You don't have to go into personal details if you do not want to share, but just give me an idea of why, like, let's say if you're feeling bad, I just want to be aware of what might be keeping you from doing your best work. Vocab, right? This vocab is difficult. This slide is an understanding check. So over each word, you're just going to draw according to this scale. So indigenization, I put 3. I'm on my way to understanding. I don't really need extra help right now. I think I'll get it eventually. I could teach someone about decolonization, but I need a lot of help with reconciliation. Then you're just telling me how you think we practice these words this week, what activities or things we talked about were indigenization, reconciliation, those things. Take a stretch break. And then you have a journal. The journal is about you personally. It is not asking you about indigenous cultures at all. It's asking you about your own personal feelings and your life. Here's my journal if you want to read it. This is how you can get to know me better. And then you have a reading. It looks like this. So in the instructions, I want you to highlight and take notes. The way you do that is you just highlight. Goodness gracious. So I just highlighted, and then I pick a color I want it to highlight, and then right here is write down your thinking, right? Why did you highlight that? And then you just click share, and that's it. And then you come back to the Pear Deck, write your paragraph response, and that is your homework. As always, please hand in work, even if it's late, even if it's from week 1, do it. Here's lecture slides if you want to look at them. The Newsela link if it does not work in Pear Deck. But that's all I have for you guys. Have a great rest of your week.